A squadron of 8 Japanese destroyers, commanded by Rear Admiral Tanaka Rizzo and carrying supplies for the garrison on Guadalcanal, was intercepted by an American contingent composed of 4 cruisers and 6 destroyers under Rear Admiral Carlton Wright. The Americans established radar contact well before the Japanese detected them, giving the engagement an appearance of clear advantage for the U.S. fleet. Yet, despite the surprise and the loss of Takanami, the lead ship that absorbed the initial salvo, Tanaka's remaining destroyers launched torpedoes that struck 4 American cruisers. Northampton sank, while the others sustained severe damage. Up to that point, American destroyers had operated under a cruiser-centered doctrine, rarely engaging independently before Tanaka's long lance torpedoes struck. From Tanaka's bridge, the outcome confirmed every expectation of Japanese tactical theory, while, on the American side, the battle triggered a surge of analysis that sped up changes already in motion in destroyer doctrine. This is precisely the episode Commander Hara records with meticulous clarity in his memoir. For the Japanese Navy, Tasafaranga was interpreted as proof of their methods, when in reality it should have served as a stark warning. The American cruisers had suffered under a torpedo tactic they had observed and actively studied. Next time Japanese destroyers confronted American counterparts without cruisers as shields, the conditions would be entirely different. Hara experienced this turning point firsthand at the Battle of Vella Gulf on August 6, 1943, although he was not aboard. He learned through survivor testimony and after-action reports. His memoir conveys the impact on Japanese destroyer command culture with remarkable honesty. At Vella Gulf, 4 American destroyers under Commander Frederick Moosbrugger ambushed 4 Japanese ships ferrying reinforcements to Kolombangara. The Americans operated independently, without cruiser support, using radar to maneuver for a coordinated long-range torpedo strike. 3 Japanese destroyers, Hagakaze, Arashi, and Kawakaze, were sunk in under 4 minutes. The 4th ship managed to escape, leaving over 1,200 Japanese sailors in the water. No American guns fired during the initial strike. The torpedoes were launched based on radar solutions, and the destroyers had already begun evasive maneuvers before the explosions began. Hara observed that the Japanese response to Vella Gulf was not the professional adjustment demanded by circumstances. There was disbelief, not about the facts, which were undeniable, but about doctrine itself. The tactic employed, a long-range radar-directed torpedo strike executed with precise coordination to arrive simultaneously before any defensive reaction, was exactly the capability Japanese destroyers had honed throughout the 1930s. They had trained extensively for it and regarded it as their signature maneuver. To see American destroyers now performing it with accuracy in the complex waters of the Slot, where Japanese navigators had assumed unmatched advantage, was a profound shock. The surprise was not that Americans could fight. Japanese officers never doubted their courage. The shock lay in seeing them rebuild themselves into a mirror of their opponent, while the Imperial Navy had failed to recognize the ongoing transformation. By mid-1943, the Japanese discovered they were no longer facing only a fleet built around battleships and carriers with destroyers in supporting roles. They were also confronting a destroyer force that had absorbed the lessons of 18 months of combat failures, evolving into a doctrine of aggressive, independent, radar-guided night operations that bore little resemblance to the forces encountered at Savo Island. Radar proved pivotal. Japanese officers frequently returned to it in post-war reflections. Although the Japanese Navy deployed Type 22 surface search radar from 1942 on some destroyers in the Solomons, it operated at 10-centimeter wavelength and yielded bearing data of limited precision. Its range discrimination was insufficient for accurate torpedo control at combat distances. American doctrine, in contrast, increasingly utilized radar with greater operational impact. Japanese officers understood the limitations of their systems and could infer the capabilities of American radar, which could generate precise fire control solutions at 5,000 meters under complete darkness. What eluded them was the operational culture built around that technology on the American side. The SG surface search radar, installed on American destroyers from late 1942 into 1943, operated at 10-centimeter wavelength with a rotating antenna producing a plan position indicator, a circular scope showing targets as luminous blips against a dark background, with the owned ship at the center. A trained operator could detect a destroyer-sized vessel at 8 to 10,000 meters, track its course and speed across multiple sweeps, and feed fire control quality data to the torpedo director. Its resolution distinguished individual ships in formation, functioning flawlessly in darkness, rain, or smoke that would reduce visual detection to 0. Japanese destroyers navigating the Slot sailed through waters visible to American radar as clearly as a chart illuminated by daylight, unaware of the threat until the torpedoes struck. Petty Officer Second Class Kenji Watanabe, a lookout aboard Shigure, one of the most battle-hardened Japanese destroyers that survived the Solomons, offered a post-war account to historian Masanori Ito. He described the night of November 2, 1943, at the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, Watanabe, with exceptional eyesight honed over 2 years of service and verified through training, manned his station with Type 7 binoculars, 7 by 50 magnification, designed for night use. He failed to detect American destroyers before torpedoes struck the cruiser Sendai nearby. He heard the impact, witnessed the explosion, and understood the event unfolding. His description emphasized the eerie absence of expected sensory cues, the silence and invisibility before the torpedoes arrived, contrary to his training, which taught that approaching ships generate noise, bow waves, or silhouettes. In exercises, he had detected Japanese ships at distances considered impossible, yet these Americans remained unseen until Sendai was aflame. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay revealed a further evolution in American tactics that Japanese officers increasingly recognized with alarm. Commander R. Lee Burke's destroyer squadron, 23, the Little Beavers, had perfected coordinated torpedo attacks, incorporating lessons from every engagement since Savo Island. Burke's approach separated destroyers entirely from the cruiser formation, placing them independently for torpedo runs, while cruisers engaged with gunfire. The destroyers attacked at high speed, withdrew before effective Japanese retaliation, and reformed for a second strike. This sequence was designed to neutralize the Japanese advantage of firing at muzzle flashes from American guns. Burke analyzed prior engagements, identified patterns in American casualties, and reshaped his force's tactics to close vulnerabilities the Japanese had exploited. Japanese destroyer commanders quickly recognized the sophistication of Burke's methods. Rear Admiral Morikazu Asugi, leading the Japanese surface contingent at Empress Augusta Bay, included in his after-action report passages that staff later described as the most candid professional assessment produced by a Japanese flag officer during the campaign. Rear Admiral Morikazu Asugi noted that the American destroyer contingent displayed a level of tactical initiative, independent maneuvering, and torpedo employment that surpassed what Japanese doctrine had credited to U.S. surface forces. He observed that the separation of destroyers from cruisers, the very tactic Japanese doctrine had developed but that Americans had rarely applied until then, had been executed effectively against his own command. He urged the combined fleet to reassess its assumptions regarding American destroyer capabilities. His recommendation was formally recorded, yet the necessary revisions were not implemented rapidly. For Commander Tomichi Hara, the most instructive night in the Solomons, in terms of understanding American capability, was not a defeat he experienced directly, but an engagement at Cape St. George on November 25, 1943. There, Burke's destroyers intercepted a Japanese squadron of 5 ships transporting supplies and sank 3, Onami, Makinami, and Yugiri, without suffering a single loss. Hara was not present during the battle, but survivor testimonies and after-action reports reached him. In his memoir, he details the tactical sequence employed by Burke: long-range radar detection, coordinated torpedo salvos before gunfire, high-speed withdrawal to prevent Japanese counteraction, followed by a second attack after the enemy formation was disrupted. The sequence mirrored precisely what Japanese doctrine had prescribed as the ideal method for night attacks. Burke had not invented the tactic. He had learned it from encounters with it, comprehended it, often better than its original developers, and turned it against its creators. The Japanese advantage with the long lance torpedo, the foundation of their surface night combat superiority, was being systematically nullified, not by superior weaponry, but through counter-doctrine. American destroyers did not carry a weapon rivaling the Long Lance's specifications. They deployed the Mark 15, a steam-powered torpedo with a maximum range of 15,000 meters at 26 knots, whereas the Type 93 could reach 40 kilometers at 36 knots. On paper, the Long Lance maintained a significant edge. Yet by late 1943, American destroyers struck at ranges and tactical angles that prevented Japanese ships from exploiting that advantage. Radar allowed engagements to start before Japanese lookouts could detect the attackers, and American doctrine dictated precisely such tactics. The human toll of the Solomons campaign was immense for Japan. The destroyer crews that entered the campaign were seasoned officers and petty officers, representing a decade of rigorous professional training. Training a lookout to Watanabe's level required years. Developing a torpedo officer capable of coordinating Japanese night attacks took even longer. The Solomons consumed these skilled men at a rate peacetime preparation could not replace. By 1944, Japanese crews often occupied roles after only months of experience, positions that had previously demanded years of preparation. The institutional knowledge that had made Japanese night surface warfare formidable resided in the men, not the ships, and those men were being lost relentlessly around Guadalcanal and the slot. The American approach differed in a crucial respect. Their crews also suffered casualties, yet the U.S. Navy's relationship to institutional knowledge was structured differently. American destroyer doctrine was not a pre-war artifact refined over peacetime training. It was being forged in real time through combat. A feedback system carried tactical information from ship captains to squadron commanders to fleet command and back to captains within cycles measured in weeks. When Burke identified a problem, his insights reached other commanders before the next engagement. Moosbrugger's long-range radar-directed torpedo attack at Vela Gulf became a technique taught to the entire destroyer force, and trained into the next generation of commanders before their first night engagement. American learning was not inherently faster due to superior intellect. It was faster because their operational culture had created a system for distributing lessons that the Japanese lacked or had implemented less effectively. Hara's assessment, made in hindsight in his 1961 memoir, deserves paraphrase rather than imprecise translation. He explained that the Japanese Navy had entered the war with pre-war doctrine as a completed product, a comprehensive framework to execute, but not continuously revise. Americans arrived in the Solomons without a fully formed doctrine for night destroyer operations. Forced to build one from repeated combat, they produced a system that was adaptive, responsive to actual conditions, and ultimately more lethal than the carefully pre-planned Japanese framework. Hara did not claim that Japanese doctrine was flawed. He argued that its completeness became a liability in a campaign that required constant adjustment. Petty Offie. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.